We're now handing over to Neil Titcomb, Managing Director, UK and Ireland at Odigo, a leading omnichannel customer engagement solution. Now, Neil is responsible for growing the business across the region and ensuring Odigo customers are reaping the benefits of their innovative solutions and ensuring they provide continued measurable business value. Good morning, Neil.
Good morning, Nick. How are you?
I'm very well. Are you well?
I am, thank you. I'm very well. Pleased to say.
Very nice to have you here. Okay, Neil, over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, yes, indeed, Nick. I mean, at Odigo, our passion is very much one of making sure that our technology is serving our customers' customers. It's the thing we are almost obsessed about in how we can put technology to work in the most appropriate way to exceed customer expectations. And in the spirit of this debate, look at how we can keep ahead of ever-changing demands on customer expectations, which I think through 2020 we can all agree has tested everybody almost to the limit. And I want to frame this short talk around some research actually initially that we conducted during 2020 and actually reference it back to some research we did in previous years outside the pandemic, of course, to really demonstrate the point of how we're in a bit of a tidal wave of change in terms of how customers are changing their habits, changing the way they want to interact with brands and services, and service providers like ourselves providing customer engagement solutions and full end-to-end customer journey mapping really need to be very mindful of that, and that's something which we're coaching and guiding our customers to work with all the time. So as I say, we actually conducted a research paper just back in September in partnership with the CCMA, and we basically did some research around customer behaviours, customer contact trends, and researched a number of different consumers across the UK in all geographies and demographics and sectors to really create what we think is quite a contrasting view of their habits and current thoughts and feelings on this topic. We also did some roundtables and some live opinion polling with some of the companies you see on the slide in front of me. So as I say, this was conducted just back in September. So it's pretty recent information, and I've just extracted a few of the interesting sound bites and findings from that to help further this conversation. So I suppose first and foremost, probably no surprise to many of the people we surveyed, nearly half said they'd obviously had a telephone engagement with a brand or a service across that period of time. But what's quite interesting is how that breaks down into the other channels that are becoming increasingly important to all of us when we're in a situation where we maybe can't interact with our preferred brand in the most easy and obvious way, in the way we've been used to in the past, and how that balances between the problem that COVID obviously brought, where companies and contact centres had a decreased number of staff and an increased number of engagements to manage. What was probably more interesting is just really how that, compared to a study we did in both 2018 and 2019. And you can see where that growth came, but the emerging channels, which is particularly interesting for me. I think we've seen a staggered start almost throughout some of the digital channels evolving, and certainly through 2019 into definitely 2020, we've seen that grow really quite considerably. But if we do compare the traditional phone channel, we can see that it has declined a little bit further. In fact, 11% overall decline against 2019. But some interesting, I guess, areas to pull out. When we look at the website web interaction growth, it's very, very small compared to the IM, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp sort of channels, which is growing exponentially now, as we would expect. And this is something which I've seen differ around the world. In certain countries, that's certainly greater, but this is obviously a UK study, and I think really talks to that challenge where consumers recognise that we're becoming increasingly time poor. We have to work our daily schedule in line with our life, and that doesn't necessarily conform to a 9 to 5 schedule. So we're looking for ways to which to leverage self-service wherever we can. And if we turn to how that compares on the framework that every brand and every vertical has a different expectation and a different sort of consumer expectation. Then within the study we conducted, we actually polled over 10 different business verticals. I just extracted 3 here to sort of highlight the point: automotive, consumer electronics, and insurance. And you can see, looking at the phone channel, if you're buying a car or indeed wanting to service your car, then 60% plus of people surveyed did indeed take to the phone first and foremost to engage with those type of brands. On the flip side, if we look at consumer electronics, it was considerably less, whereas much more people would be engaging online through live chat or chatbot in the first instance, through all the way to the other extreme in the physical store, where really only the again, for pretty obvious reasons, the servicing or buying of a car, you would actually go into a dealership in that example. But it's just a reminder that for many companies, they've had to sort of approach customer service as a one-size-fits-all for a long time. There's always been segmentation around the problem type or obviously the reason for interacting, but little has been given to thought around how we might differ through demographic, location, or particular situation. Excuse me, my voice is going today. Excuse me. And then the age-old dilemma of at what point do we offer a self-service channel? Again, we've seen this evolve over recent years. Some consumer groups think that there's been too much sort of a focus on this, and the word deflection is often mentioned, where we believe that the brand doesn't want us to talk to them at all, and they actually resist offering channels for live interaction, and much more self-service is almost pushed upon us. I think that's a dangerous game to play. We need to strike that balance very carefully. And again, if we look at all the different vertical segments here, we can see a marked change in the attitude to the consumer who prefers to follow a self-service route where appropriate, to those that are less happy to do that and want a more of a live, potentially human engagement. So, supermarkets, unsurprisingly, we prefer to self-serve in terms of buying our groceries on a weekly basis, through again to servicing or buying a car, where we're much more likely to want a physical real-time interaction. But of course, COVID really shone a light on all of that. And unsurprisingly, of the people we spoke to, 30% said they did have to wait too long to interact with a brand. I think throughout the COVID period, the last 9 months, we saw a sort of a steep rise and then fall of customer attitudes to be patient and how long they were prepared to wait to be serviced. There was a definite acceptance that through March, April, May, possibly into June, we saw consumers accept that their brands were in some turmoil. They were, as I say, overloaded and understaffed and not working in the natural environment. So there was an attitude that people would be more patient and wait, but that's now somewhat subsided. And I think the general feeling is we as consumers believe after nearly 9 months, our service providers should be reorganized now to provide the same service we enjoyed before the COVID pandemic indeed hit. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And if we look just both in this instance across some different geographies and some different channels, looking at the average propensity to wait across the phone, then our recent study conducted at the end of last year revealed an average accepted wait time of 3 minutes, 17 seconds. It's interesting to see how that's slightly different across different geographies. The Spanish a lot more likely to wait than the English, which was quite interesting. Response by email, unsurprisingly, if we look to where it was in 2015, many of us were prepared to wait as long as a couple of days. Now that's reduced all the way back down to no more than about 6 hours in terms of actually an actual reply to an email over and above an automated response. And then into the emerging channels, fascinating really, looking at the social channels of Twitter, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, etc. We're now sort of at the point where anything less than 3 hours to get a reply to a tweet is considered unacceptable. And we look at chat, which is really interesting, then we're down to under a minute, of course, for a real-time engagement. And we've all had experiences where we've opened up a conversation with a live agent through chat, and we've had to get into a queue and wait. And clearly we're not, as a society, prepared to wait very long in that regard. And why should we? I mean, if that channel is being offered, it should be serviced appropriately in the same sort of regime as you would try to handle a phone call. And then within all of this, we have this wonderful challenge of an ever-changing expectation with demographic. And arguably, there's 5 demographic segments that our customers could fall into today. Obviously, this does differ somewhat depending upon the market you're in, but conceivably, you have everything from a baby boomer, the consumers that are in the 70s and 80s, typically all the way through to the Gen Alphas, as we call them now, which have a completely different view of the world. They're obviously not fully adulthood yet, but when they do, they'll be looking very much at an AI, automated, predictive, assumptive engagement wherever they can. And for many of our customers, they really are sort of stepping up to the challenge of understanding the makeup of the customer more than just the problem the customer might be presenting them. So at Odigo, we're working towards taking our brands and our clients into this automated, contextual, highly personalized world of customer engagement, looking to deploy technologies where possible to look at the emotion, the sentiment, the customer history specifically to that individual engagement, not just judge them on the channel of choice, the product they have, maybe the location they're calling from. And that puts us into an opportunity to really leverage automation, but only where it's relevant. So not providing possibly a self-service channel to everybody, might be dictated depending upon their journey up to that point that week or that year, depending on the situation. We want to leverage data to provide that both to the customer, but also the advisor, to ensure they have the information at hand and it's pertinent to the problem that they're, or service or question they're indeed adhering to. Not always possible in many scenarios we see today. Lots of talk about AI across the conference and leveraging it to ensure again, predictability, and into the next point, personalization is key. If we can start to understand the journey I've embarked on, whether that's cross-channel or not in that particular moment, that might dictate how I'm actually handled in that instance, and it will be a different engagement in that situation to the one I might engage upon the following week for a different problem. And again, you're going to delight your customers by offering them something which is specific and unique to them in that moment. And for me, one of my personal favorites is all around personalization. I can't labor this point enough. I think we are all individuals, even our brands that service many millions of customers. There's an expectation where you can become much more personal. You can take a lot of time to understand who I am as an individual, not just to say through the products that I'm using or the services from you, but my moment in time at that point. If I've called 5 times that day, and we recognise there's a complaint in process, then obviously there's cause for prioritisation, maybe less identification to exaggerate and possibly frustrate them further, and take them to the agent they last spoke to. Some basic things like that, which should and are very possible to indeed do. And I guess it dovetails into the last point around contextual routing, looking at the knowledge you hold on me, my journey, my products, my services, my history, and wrapping that into a service that befits me, my age, am I likely to want to engage online first or not, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a big problem. It's not easily fixed, but I think if we're to, as brands, differentiate, stand out from the crowd and be the ambassadors and brands our customers expect, then these are the things I think from Odigo's point of view we need to be very mindful of. So with that, Nick, I'll pause, and I think there's time for some questions.
Indeed. Thanks very much, Neil. That was such an insightful presentation, and you covered so much in the 10 minutes there. So we got some time for questions from the audience, and the first question that's come in is, what advice do you have, Neil, for organisations who want to build and keep trust with their customers?
Well, I think it does come back to exceeding expectations. So I think there's lots of talk about to what degree will we pay a premium for enhanced service compared to maybe a cheaper product or service with another brand that might not have the same level of customer service focus. And if you keep focused upon that, then people will indeed pay a premium, and that indeed then breeds loyalty and trust and reduces customer churn. And a lot of it is down to efforts. So I kind of alluded to that in the sense that if you can make my life easier, provide a more frictionless engagement when I need to, if you're a utility brand, then arguably my engagements are much more erratic, possibly only quarterly based or annual based, versus a brand with a bank, which are likely to be much more digital first, less branch. But again, depending on whether you're my son or my mother, the attitude to how you provide me those tools should be considered. And I think from a marketing point of view and attracting customers, that needs to be always considered, because you're more likely then to retain me and keep me more than me be tempted to change because there's a shiny alternative, which might be cheaper.
Mm. And I guess, currently we'll make more allowances than we will next year when, hopefully, if the news is correct, the vaccine starts going out, and as promised, by spring we're past this. Our expectations are going to be back where they were. I've certainly experienced in lockdown being on the phone for hours waiting for an agent and then getting a bill for 45 quid for the call as well to boot. So these are unusual times. But one of our customers has asked, were there any major surprises in your research into customer behaviour, Neil, that you can highlight for us?
I think just the fact that despite, as you just said, we knew and we were prepared as consumers that when we rushed to try to change our holiday plans or get refunds on our flight tickets, whatever the case may be, back in April time particularly, we were prepared for a pretty frustrating and time-consuming experience. People were still prepared to wait, and research reflected that when the calls connected, consumers were very sympathetic to the agents that were sat at home with the barking dog and the challenge they were in personally. And when they were told, well, I actually can't access that information because my home work environment doesn't give me access to that particular system, people were still sympathetic to that, as they say. And I think that was somewhat surprising. Like I say, I don't think that now is extended through to where we are now at the end of the year. And to your earlier point, I think next year let's hope when we get back to whatever new normal is, we will learn from lots of these engagements. I do think consumers will have a bit more of a level set in terms of where they think the bar needs to be, because we've seen how bad it can get when there's an explosion in volume and a reduction in capability and capacity. And it has obviously pushed people to use channels in all demographics, hasten to add, that they might not have gone to first and foremost in the past, which we've seen in the emerging channel adoption. So to your question, I think it is about the steeper rise in the use of WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, Twitter even, to contact and reach out to a brand. That was not growing in the same way. And my mother, as a baby boomer, would never have dreamt of sending a WhatsApp to get a query on a Sky account, for example. But now I'm showing her how to do it, and she might do it again. Yeah. So we should be thankful for that, I suppose.
Indeed. Terrific. How do you think customer behaviour is going to evolve as we hopefully, as I said, move towards a pandemic-free, brave new world, as one of our delegates has put it, in 2021?
I suppose, I think I said at the top of the presentation, the phone will always remain primary. I think I've always been a staunch believer of that. When we saw all the rhetoric around AI came into play a couple of years ago, there was lots of talk around contact centres would be ultimately replaced and made redundant. We'll go to a fully augmented reality, but that's not going to happen. I think we've seen that. But there is going to be a step change inevitably as my son, as a Generation Z 20-year-old, comes of age, starts to interact with more brands. His expectation will drive banks and insurers and utility companies and even public sector services to think differently, because they have to. Because as I get older and retire, my attitudes and habits will not to die with me, but will change with me. So I think brands, maybe for the first time, and I've been in contact centers for 20 years, and I've certainly seen a steeper change towards the attitude of, okay, we can't just put everything first and foremost behind an IVR on the phone. We've got to be more mindful of there's as many engagements coming in through other channels now, not quite equal yet, but getting closer to, than there was just a few years ago. So post-COVID, I do think we'll see a slight redress in the balance, and that will bring challenges to some businesses that don't have the systems to provide an end-to-end customer journey, which unfortunately many still don't.
Indeed, indeed. And our final question, Neil, is what lessons can we learn from the unfortunate demise of Arcadia and Debenhans and similar brands?
It's hard to read that, it really is. But I suppose, you know, we really shouldn't be surprised if anyone judged the load of their postman every day. It tells us that, you know, the e-commerce side of things and our attitude to buy online now has exploded. And I think, to the earlier point, that probably won't subside as much as we think post-COVID. Lots of people who didn't buy online before now realise they can very easily, and it works. So obviously that is going to have a detrimental effect to the high street. Those brands need to pivot into obviously a digital first engagement. I think the role of video, for example, in online shopping plays a key part. I don't see as much of it as probably as could be leveraged. So virtual changing rooms, interacting with a personal shopper, because certain things are emotional purchases. Buying a TV is one thing, buying a new coat or a pair of shoes is somewhat different. Those are clothing retailers, and it's probably no coincidence that they've suffered, because with the inability to try something on or facilitate a very smooth buying process and returns process, if that's not there, then people will go elsewhere to the online brands, which we know has ultimately possibly the demise of Arcadia with the likes of Boohoo and ASOS and others. So you know, it has to be said. So I think the high street will prevail, but it will evolve into a digital first engagement with maybe a more of a showroom type of arrangement to back it up potentially.
Yeah.
I wouldn't like to see it.
And obviously some repurposing of the high street itself is no doubt on the cards. Thanks again, Neil. Some great possibilities for engaging customers effectively. So thanks very much for your time and for joining us today. Thank you very much, Neil.
Have a good day.
And you. And you.